Now to this year's keynote addresses. We are fortunate to have two prominent guests of honor. Our first keynote speaker is Ms. Alice RAWSTHORN, co-founder of Design Emergency. She is an award-winning design critic and author. Her books, including Design as an Attitude and Design Emergency: Building a Better Future, have been translated into more than a dozen languages. And for over a decade, her weekly design column for the New York Times was syndicated worldwide. In all her work, she champions design as a social, political, and ecological tool. So please join me in welcoming Ms. RAWSTHORN.
Well, thank you all very much. First of all, my thanks to President Fuji, Chairman Che, and their teams for inviting me to speak here at Tokyo Forum. I'm deeply honored by the invitation, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. I look forward to learning so much from all the other speakers and the audience. I'm particularly pleased to have been invited to contribute to this debate on its critically important theme, Shape the Future, Design for Tomorrow, and to explore how design can help us to shape a safe, fair, efficient, and hopefully enlightened future. This has long defined my work in my weekly design columns for the New York Times, my books like Hello World, Design Emergency, the podcast and research platform I run with my friend Paola Antonelli, the Senior Curator of Architecture and Design at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It is also central to my most recent book, Design as an Attitude, which discusses why and how design can be deployed as a social, political, economic, and ecological tool that can be used to foster positive change at this exceptionally turbulent, often terrifying time when we in our ecosphere face such ominous threats and challenges. I'll chart why this has happened and what I believe it means in terms of design's constantly changing role in our lives, but I'll begin by describing what I believe design to be, because the harsh truth is that most people still see it in its stereotypical guise as a stylistic and consumerist or PR tool, as something that blings up overpriced hoodies and trainers and produces uncomfortable, unusable chairs. Design is, of course, guilty on all counts, but there's much, much more to it. It's a complex and elusive phenomenon that has adopted different meanings at different times and in different contexts, leaving it prone to muddles, misunderstandings, and cliches. But I believe, despite this, it has always had one central role, and it's as this: design is an agent of change that can help us make sense of what's happening and to turn it to our advantage. And its strategic role as a change agent can be applied in many different contexts: cultural, economic, technological, scientific, and of course environmental changes. And design has been doing this for centuries, long before a word was invented to describe it. For example, prehistoric men and women, on the necessity as the mother of invention principle, used design as a tool when they sharpened sticks, stones, and animal bones into weapons or tools to eat and drink from, or molded clay from the river into bowls and other eating vessels. And there are other equally ancient examples of design, and this is one of them. It's, of course, the clenched fist, which for over 3,000 years has symbolized strength and unity in the face of danger and oppression for courageous people all over the world. It's such a powerful symbol and so physically fitting, because the simple gesture of raising and clenching your fist sends blood coursing down the vessels in your arm, so it actually makes you feel more powerful and better able to stand up to oppression. And this is why it's been used by a succession of activist movements, from the workers' rights and women's suffrage movements in the early 20th century, to the Russian revolutionaries, to the gay rights, anti-racism and feminist movements in the late 20th century, and of course to activists like these in Black Lives Matter. Only slightly less ancient is this symbol. It's the white flag, which for 2,000 years has been used as a symbol of surrender, the end of conflict, and the start of peace. But it was only officially accepted as a signifier of this in the mid-19th century. And in recent years, we have seen an extraordinarily inspiring example of design being powered by the necessity being the mother of invention in terms of the design response to the war in Ukraine. Now, Ukrainian designers, immediately after the war started, immediately adapted their practices to contribute to the war effort after Vladimir Putin's illegal invasion. So architects designed schools and conference centers to house refugees and other displaced people. Fashion designers stopped producing clothing and made sleeping bags, military uniforms, and so on for the military. Community volunteers designed ingenious ways of protecting Ukraine's beloved historic monuments, like this one in Odessa. And I was lucky enough to go to Ukraine this summer to talk to people within the design community and see how they're adapting to a conflict which, tragically, they all believe could continue for many, many, many more years. And there have continued to be some extraordinary examples of Ukrainian design innovation. Like this one. Ukraine has had a burgeoning tech sector ever since it was liberated from Soviet control. And so its leading tech designers, like the ones behind this app, Kyiv Digital, have developed tools to help the military and also the civic community through the war effort. So Kyiv Digital, which you're encouraged to download as soon as you arrive in Ukraine, not only notifies people as to when missile strikes are going to come, but it tells them where the nearest shelter is, whether it has Wi-Fi, and if not, where that nearest shelter is, and does the same for pharmacies, food shops, and petrol stations. It also, crucially, tells people when the emergency is over and the strike has been disabled. Another incredible innovation are what are called the ambulance trains. And the Ukrainian military collaborated with the design engineering team at Ukrainian railways to redesign carriages of trains so they could be mobile operating theatres, and hospital wards, and also be used as intensive care units. They have already shipped over 60,000 members of the Ukrainian military from the war zone to specialist hospitals elsewhere in the country where they can get the treatment they need. And the NGO Médecins Sans Frontières has developed a similar service for Ukrainian citizens. Now, there are other examples all over the world of civic ingenuity on a similar scale. So it was heartening to see, after the terrible floods that devastated the Spanish city of Valencia only a couple of weeks ago, that this was the response of citizens the following day. Here they are queuing up outside the Science and Innovation Center in Valencia, volunteering to help with the clear-up effort. And Spanish tech designers have followed the lead of their Ukrainian counterparts by developing apps to alert people to all sorts of incidents that are related to this. So most people, as I've said, still don't think of design like this. They think of it as it was in the industrial age, when it was applied knowingly and systematically to manufacture huge quantities of identical goods at consistent quality and for affordable prices. The practice of design was formalized at this time with the introduction of training programs, specialist schools, and clearly defined methodologies. Design became professionalized by industrialization, but it was also restricted to a commercial role, something that was generally executed under instruction from other people. And this, for me, was the beginning of its diminution and its stereotyping as a promotional or styling tool, something concerned with surface appearance rather than substance. Now, there were always designers who rebelled against this, including this character, the remarkable Richard Buckminster Fuller, the North American designer, engineer, architect, the self-styled astronaut for Spaceship Earth. He raised the alarm about the environmental damage caused by industrialization as early as the 1920s, but he was ignored and dismissed as a crank. Then there was the wonderful Laszlo Molynář, the Hungarian designer, visual theorist, who radicalized the Bauhaus in Germany at the 1920s, notably by allowing women students to study whatever they wished, including all the subjects, about 90% of them, that were previously reserved for men. He then was similarly radical when he fled from Nazi Germany. He was Jewish, so couldn't stay there, before World War II, to live in Chicago, where he set up a series of experimental design schools. And in a city where the education system was still largely segregated, he welcomed African-American students and teachers to his schools. And crucially, Laszlo Molynář reinvented the concept of design. And he articulated this through the through the title to the second chapter of his book, Vision in Motion. And the title of chapter 2 was Designing is Not a Profession, but an Attitude. And this is how he redefined design as an improvisational medium that was rooted in instinct, ingenuity, and resourcefulness, as it had been before the Industrial Revolution. Now, I believe that designing as an attitude, as articulated by Laszlo Molynář, is absolutely relevant to design today. And that is why I chose it as the title of my latest book. And for me, what inspired this was that because of digital culture and the availability of new digital tools, design culture and the design process and design practice has been absolutely transformed. It's been liberated from the constraints it faced during the industrial age and has become the improvisational, naturally ingenious force that Laszlo Molynář forecast. Now, most of these tools are very basic and inexpensive, so much so they're so familiar that they could seem rather boring. But when they're imaginatively applied, they've proved remarkably useful in helping designers to define their own ways of working. So one is that thanks to crowdfunding platforms and the emergence of generous trusts and foundations who are willing to invest in design, designers have been able to raise substantial sums of money to begin experimental projects. An example being this is the Ocean Cleanup, the Dutch social enterprise that's committed to clearing all the plastic trash in the Pacific. It's been a complex, contradictory, and at times contentious project, but because its founder, Boyan Slat, raised hundreds of millions of US dollars from crowdfunding, it has been able to continue developing and has now been clearing huge quantities of plastic trash from the oceans for many years. Designers have also been helped by the availability of powerful computers that enable them to process huge quantities of complex data, and also by the availability of what's called open source intelligence. This is data that people get from cameras like this, surveillance cameras like this, from phones, from video clips, from find by apps, from traffic surveillance, and some design agencies have turned this into ways of securing restorative justice for the victims of humanitarian and climate crimes. And this is just as well because we urgently need design to fulfill all these functions at an extraordinarily turbulent, traumatic, and difficult time for our planet. Now, there are many problems that we face today, and the previous speakers have alluded to them. But for me, the situation was summed up by this very simple sign at a recent Women's March on London. All the other posters were focusing on individual issues, whether it's the climate emergency, the refugee crisis, and so on. But this one summed it up brilliantly, too much to fit on one sign. So what could have been on there? An obvious example is the number of refugees over the last decade worldwide has trebled. It's now nearly 120 million people. And of course, the tragedy, trauma, and turmoil caused by the horrific conflicts in Gaza, Lebanon, Ukraine, Sudan, Ethiopia, the increasing aggression, here in Asia, and the plethora of other wars worldwide threatens more and more of these refugees, people to be displaced. There's also a growing mistrust of democracy and the political establishment, the rise of intolerance, prejudice, bigotry, and the crisis of social justice. The growing imbalance of wealth between rich and poor, old and young, the curse of McJobs, and the housing and homelessness crises, and ever more terrifying terrorist attacks, cybercrimes, and killing sprees. And of course, the accelerating climate emergency and its terrible ecological, economic, and humanitarian consequences in areas of the world like this that have been reduced to desertification. But design is, of course, also absolutely rooted in developments in technology. And artificial intelligence, although it has fueled even greater technophobia in many different ways, as Chairman Che alluded to, it also, I think, could be seen as a very productive lesson in design's role in helping us to interpret new technologies of every type to ensure that they will affect us positively rather than negatively. And it has been heartening to see design foregrounded in the ongoing debate on AI. Now, on our Design Emergency podcast, Paola interviewed the Australian technologist and researcher Kate Crawford, the author of a brilliant book on artificial intelligence, The Atlas of AI, about this. And Kate talked about the environmental damage caused by artificial intelligence and other forms of big tech, the human damage it can cause, and the absolute importance of debating its pros and cons. Now, I have addressed many of these issues in Design as an Attitude, because design isn't a panacea for any of these problems, but it can help us to address them intelligently and responsibly. Attitudinal designers are already grappling with many of these challenges and proving exactly what design can do. Now, there are lots of examples in Design as an Attitude and in the interviews Paola and I have conducted for Design Emergency, which began as an Instagram research platform in the COVID pandemic, but has since become a podcast, a YouTube channel, this book, which was published by Phaidon. We have also discussed Design Emergency all over the world, at universities like this one and Harvard, at political forums like the Conseil de l'Europe and UNESCO. We're currently working with the International Red Cross on developing a conference on humanitarian design in Paris. So there is significant and growing interest in all these issues. Now, there are many examples of the brilliant and ingenious and inspiring ways that designers have responded to these challenges in the books and on Design Emergency, but I'm going to talk about just 3 projects in detail. Now, the first is this one. This is the Great Green Wall of Africa. It's a truly epic design endeavor, and its aim is to develop a 8,000-kilometer strip of vegetation across one of the hottest, driest, poorest, and most dangerous parts of our planet, the southern strip of the Sahara Desert in Africa. It is a very complex project addressing intersectional challenges where one problem, initially drought, has not only caused other environmental problems like desertification, you can see its impact here, but also hugely important economic issues of increased poverty, mass migration, and famine, and so on. And the aim of the Great Green Wall is to use this notion, this very romantic notion of the wall of vegetation, really to re-irrigate and revitalize stricken agricultural land in this area, to help the local economy, and also to provide food and other resources for local people. It is organized by the African Union, so it's a Pan-African project, as it should be, but it's largely funded by international funders. So they would include the World Bank, the United Nations, and various national governments. Its progress has been very erratic. It began in 2007, so quite a long time ago. Senegal, pictured here, showed early progress with tree planting, but other countries like Burkina Faso and Niger tended to concentrate on reviving ancient agricultural and irrigation practices. But because the geographic context is so vulnerable, as civil war and other conflicts have broken out in the regions, progress has stopped almost entirely in some of the early successes, like Ethiopia. But 3 years ago, when things really looked quite bleak for the Great Green Wall, because less than 20% of it was completed in over a decade of work, the United Nations and the French government put together a package of 19 billion US dollars of investment in the project. So it now has a fighting chance of success and achieving its objective of developing 30 million new green jobs in this region by the end of 2027. So this, I think, could be seen in the future as an example of the kind of intensely complex intersectional challenges that design can help to address. Another approach is using new technologies to develop new forms of design, as the architect A.L. Weisman and his collaborators at Forensic Architecture, an investigative design research agency based in London, are doing by using them to secure restorative justice for the victims of abuses of human rights and climate crimes. A.L. and his team at Goldsmiths University analysed data from diverse sources, much of it open source intelligence, to uncover the truth about such violations, climate and war crimes, and other abuses. They assemble teams of coders, filmmakers, lawyers, scientists, 3D modelers, and other specialists to reconstruct scenes of crime or conflict, such as identifying the human, structural and ecological impact of Israel's military attacks on Gaza. And here we see Gaza City. Another project they have looked at are ecological abuses in the Amazon in Brazil. So they have tracked and traced the problems that are caused there for local communities. Now, another wonderful example of the strategic use of design, but from a possibly unexpected source, is this. It is Sehat Kahani, which is a telemedicine platform that was launched 6 years ago in Pakistan by 2 women doctors, Sara Saeed Karan, you can see her second from left on the screen, and her friend from medical school, Ifat Zafar Agar. And they decided that as there were far too few women doctors in Pakistan, a country of 200 million people, less than half of whom have easy access to healthcare, the problem is far greater for women. They realized that a cause of this problem was that many doctor brides, as they're called, like them, qualified as doctors, but then came under family and cultural pressure to stop working once they married and had children. But they designed a system whereby the doctor brides could practice from their homes and diagnose patients in e-clinics like this all over Pakistan, where the patients were accompanied by local nurses, and the nurses would then follow the patient's progress. When the COVID-19 pandemic began, Sehat Kahani had just launched an app, and it's just as well they did, because all the e-clinics had to close, as did many healthcare centers throughout Pakistan. But because of the app, they could continue to operate and massively expand their audience. By the start of the pandemic, they had already treated 350,000 patients, most of them women, which was an incredible achievement in itself. They're now treating over 3 million patients in Pakistan, showing how powerful design can be when non-designers like Sarah and Ifat use it in a particularly imaginative and inspiring way. Nor were independent designers expected to raise tens of millions of dollars to mount epic ecological endeavors like the Great Green Wall of Africa, or on the scale of the ocean cleanup, or doctors like Sarah and Ifat to recognize that design could prove useful in their work. Even now, people are likelier to see design as a styling tool or as a reason why plastic trash is poisoning the oceans rather than as a means of cleaning it away. And if Moulinage's ambitious eclectic vision of design is to be realized, those cliches must be squashed. The only way to do so is for design to prove its worth in its new terrain, because why else would politicians, bureaucrats, and NGO consider it to be capable of helping the victims of war crimes or climate crimes to secure justice, I believe passionately that design is one of our most powerful tools to address these complex challenges, but only if it's used in collaboration with other disciplines and it's deployed intelligently, sensitively, and with extreme care and precision. Because otherwise, how can design win the public confidence and political support it needs to be empowered to play a more prominent and potent role in our lives? This is also going to demand fundamental changes in design culture. One is looking at design in the way I have described as a strategic tool that can be used in an inclusive and open-ended way to address major challenges, and to do so, number two, in collaboration with relevant specialists from other disciplines, and to treat those exercises as a learning experience rather than as a new business grab, as traditionally designers often did, and to learn from them for the future. Another essential change is that design needs to become more compassionate. In the industrial age, it achieved a great deal, but it tended to be defined by certainties, which made it plucky and optimistic, but also prone to arrogance. Empathy is going to be essential to design in the future, not just to our fellow human beings, but all the species with whom we share this planet. Number three is that design must become much more diverse and inclusive. It has frankly been dominated by white men from the global north for far too long, many of whom have achieved an enormous amount in design. But it stands to reason that if you believe in design and its power to help us address these complicated challenges, we must have the best possible designers. They must be the brightest and the best, and we're not going to get them unless they come from every area of society in terms of gender, age, ability, heritage, specialism, and so on. And this was illustrated beautifully by the brilliant curator Leslie Locko. This is part of her installation, an epic exhibition at the Venice Architecture Biennale last year, and it focused on Africa, laboratory of the future, the fastest growing continent on our planet, and what it can offer by designing from scratch. Now, and finally, we have to accept that as designers and design projects become more ambitious, the consequences of failure will escalate, because just as every thoughtfully planned and executed design project will represent a step forward, every sloppily designed flop risks being a major setback. And for that reason, designers can learn a great deal, as can the people who commission and collaborate with designers, from the man who initiated a research study for this project, Dutch architect, and as soon as he graduated, he decided that he wanted to investigate a very expensive and complex post-conflict reconstruction project in Uruzgan, one of the poorest, most remote areas of Afghanistan. And the Dutch government, helped by the Australian government, had funded this very costly post-conflict reconstruction project there. And you can see some of the infrastructure they funded on the screen. It was factories, mosques, schools, hospitals, health centers, roads, even an airport. And Jan Willem went there and his plan was to identify whether all this investment was fit for purpose. In other words, was it working as it was expected to? Was it value for money? And his conclusions were deeply dispiriting. He discovered that only 20% of the projects were actually fit for purpose and functioning in a productive way. 50% of them were just about functioning but were barely viable and will probably need huge increased investment to make them viable in the long term. And other projects had been abandoning completely, an example being this, which is a derelict school in a village in Uruzgan. The village only had 2,500 inhabitants. The Dutch government built 5 primary schools there. And obviously there weren't enough children in the village to fill them. All 5 schools were abandoned, like this one, and the village still doesn't have a school. Another problem was with an asphalt road that was originally built for the military in Uruzgan, and then handed over to the local community. This sounds like a wonderful thing to do. The problem was that local people had never driven on a road like that before. They had only ever driven on tracks like this. So there was a tragic plethora of road accidents. A number of children died as a result of them. And the reason being that none of the designers, the architects, the engineers, the politicians, the development economists involved in this project had really researched the local context. They hadn't taken into account what local customs, the local economy, the local climate would make in terms of the usage of these buildings, which was why the vast majority of the money that they invested in Aruzgan with very good intentions was wasted, frankly. And the principal reason was that this whole project had been designed without the necessary knowledge of the needs of the local community and no proper understanding of the suitability for the environment. Now, Jan published his findings in a huge report that he submitted to the Dutch government. And thankfully, it was paid attention to, and I think this, combined with the wonderful news that the University of Tokyo is planning to initiate a design school, is evidence for the greater seriousness with which design is now taken. Jan is now working for NATO, the United Nations, the Dutch Royal Military Academy, and the Dutch Army in finding ways of ensuring that the next generation of army officers and post-conflict economists and specialists are better informed about projects like Task Force Aruzgan, so they're actually fit for purpose and value for money rather than a waste of time. So this, for me, this idea of a designer sort of policing fellow designers is an excellent development in design, which I'm sure will be applied in many other contexts, but is also part of the rigor with which design needs to be conceived and executed if we're to make the most of design's power to help us at this extraordinarily traumatic and terrifying time. Thank you very much. Dom arigatou gozaimasu.
Thank you so much, Ms. RAWSTHORN, for helping us understand the influence of designs in our lives, the power of design, and its imminent social responsibilities for a better future. Thank you so much.